first thought about the question, what makes humans unique, my initial reaction was that we actually might not be that special at all. Coming into this course, I believe that human uniqueness came from our ego. We have this tendency to view ourselves as distinct from other life because we're at the top of the food chain and have achieved impressive feats like landing on the moon. But even that major accomplishment was fueled by competition and pride. It was two countries aiming to beat each other to prove who was more advanced, more distinct. To me, ego seemed to be a part of our nature, something that might even contribute to what makes us human. And when I thought about it like that, I began to question whether those very motives really make us different from the chimpanzees we evolved from. Perhaps it's just our ego that convinces us otherwise. As this course progressed, however, my view on human uniqueness started to become more complex. During the first week's lecture, we looked at different philosophical perspectives on human nature, and two in particular stood out to me. The first was proposed by David Hume, who argued that although humans may reason better than animals typically do, our reasoning is not fundamentally different in kind from theirs. In other words, we might not be unique, just more advanced. And this initially supported my view. It reinforced the idea that humans might believe that we are unique simply just as a result of our ego, our drive to be better than others. But then there's René Descartes, who argued the contrary. He believed that humans are essentially thinking beings, and all other animals lack this capacity entirely. It's our capacity for thought that separates us from the natural world. It's our ability to think that we're unique that truly sets us apart, and potentially even defining us as humans. So now, instead of seeing the answer as so obvious, I started to realize that the question is much more philosophically contested, and my original explanation based on ego might have been too simple. Like most thorough philosophers, I found it paramount to look further into views that oppose my own. One idea that particularly influenced my thinking came from week 2's lecture and tutorial, where we explored the mind-body problem. This debate asked us whether the mind is simply a physical part of the brain, or whether it is something fundamentally different from the body. Philosophers often frame this debate in terms of physicalism and dualism. Physicalists argue that the mind is ultimately the result of the physical processes in the brain, which, if true, consciousness isn't something that makes us unique. It's just a product of biology. However, dualists argue the opposite, that the mind and the body are fundamentally different kinds of things. As Descartes suggests, we are thinking beings, meaning that our capacity for thoughts and consciousness is distinct from the physical body. From this perspective, the human mind could be something uniquely different from the rest of the natural world. And this idea was expanded upon in week 2's reading, where Amy Kine discusses the concept of qualia, the idea of there being a what it feels like aspect to consciousness. For example, we don't just register pain, we actually experience it. If I broke my arm, and you broke yours, the exact subjective what it feels like is only accessible from the first person perspective. Only I will know my true experience. And that made me realize something important. If the mind is non-physical, then humans may possess something that cannot be reduced to just biology. Our minds could be what make us unique. This really forced me to question my earlier assumption too, as qualia in particular made me realize that our experiences have a kind of subjective depth, something that isn't easily explained in purely physical terms. Instead of seeing human uniqueness as just a product of ego, I began to consider whether our capacity for conscious thought reflects something genuinely unique. At the same time though, physicalist explanations remind us that human minds may still be grounded in the same natural processes that shape all other organisms. Another week that significantly influenced my thinking was week 3, where we explored the idea of personal identity, essentially what makes us over time. What specifically brought my attention to this topic were the thought experiments that we discussed in the tutorial, such as brain transplants. For example, if your brain, memories, and thoughts were placed into another body, would that really still be you? Physicalist and dualist perspectives play a major role in this discussion as well, as they both come to quite the opposite conclusion. Physicalist views typically tie our identity to the body, whereas dualist views allow identity to follow the mind instead. Personally, this led me to think that our identity is not just tied to the physical body, but to our mental continuity, our memories, thoughts, and sense of self. But this really complicated my earlier view, because I had assumed that our sense of uniqueness was simply the result of our ego. But now I'm wondering whether my definition of ego was too shallow. Maybe it's not just about pride and competition. Maybe it's our ability to form a sense of identity and recognize ourselves as individuals over time. So, although I still do believe that there is an element of biological instincts such as competition and pride that make us feel unique, my view has become far more nuanced. Rather than human uniqueness only being a product of ego, I now see it as partly grounded in our capacity for self-awareness, our ability to reflect on our own thoughts, our identity, and existence itself. And perhaps what truly distinguishes humans is not just what we achieve, but our ability to question who we are in the first place.